So I work in Manchester, so I come down on the train today, and I work for the NHS, so this is probably a bit of an NHS-y type talk. We've had a few talks earlier today that have been a bit sort of generic and a bit sort of, I'm going to say airy-fairy in terms of change and healthcare and change. This is, I suppose, is an exemplar for a really specific example of transformational change of a particular service. But actually, you could translate the learning and the magic, if you like, into all sorts of different types of settings. I think we've got a good example of how the NHS could change if it chose to do things a bit differently. And I'm just going to talk about some of the kind of key reasons why we've been able to do it, whilst perhaps others flounder and other endless transformations of NHS care often fail. So my background, I was just saying, is I'm not clinical. I come from a science background, but my background is mainly clinical research and managing networks, so change management and getting the NHS to do things differently and sustaining that change. So that's my sort of background. How many people here actually work for the NHS or NHS? And everybody else from private companies or third sector? Okay, so I'll try and not make it too NHS-y when we tend to kind of dive down into the detail of things and use lots of acronyms, but I won't do that. So just a very brief, so we've got a Twitter account if you're interested and want to follow us, and we've got a website with more information. Is there a clicker? Aha, there is. So just a brief word about stroke. You don't have to know anything about stroke. I didn't know anything about stroke until 3 years ago. So there's lots of work going on nationally to centralise specialised care pathways. So this could apply to major trauma, critical care, various things, where you need people across a region to go to a specialist centre because they can provide it better than perhaps a local hospital. Then this kind of model applies. So you're scooped up by an ambulance. And you're taken possibly past your local hospital to a specialist hospital, in our case a hyperacute stroke centre, where you get very specialised care, sometimes for a short period of time, sometimes for longer. In stroke for us that's 3 days, and then you get either transferred back to your local hospital who'll provide sort of ongoing rehabilitation care for perhaps a week, maybe a few weeks, maybe longer if you have quite a dense stroke, a kind of more complex stroke, or you might go home from the specialist centre or go home from your local hospital, usually with the support of what we call a community team, a specialist community team, who are used to dealing with people who've had a neurological impairment. I don't know if you know a lot about stroke, but there are lots of things that you might not see. So there's disability, physical disability after stroke, but there's lots of things such as memory loss, fatigue, cognitive impairment that might not be visible, that a specialist team needs to provide support for, as opposed to just generalists. So that's our kind of care pathway. And I'm not going to talk about the transformation we've done in terms of acute care, which is the kind of buzzword at the moment, mainly because we're part of a research study that did a lot of analysing about that, and I've talked endlessly around the country about this sort of thing. So in 2010, we in London undertook a major transformation of our acute pathway to this model. We went half hog, London went whole hog, and in 2015 we went to a fully centralised model. If you're interested in any of that, then you can read all about it, because it was part of a research study and is the basis now for quite a lot of the evidence around transformation to centralised services that's talked about in terms of why regions should move to a centralised trauma model or a centralised stroke model. Projects like this provide the evidence in terms of reduction in deaths, reduction in length of stay in hospital, and sort of patient experience stuff. So I'm not going to talk about that because that's been sort of done to death. What I am going to talk about is the less sexy part of the pathway that people don't really like talking about, and that's community care. It's not medically led clinically, and therefore it often gets very little airtime. But if you talk to people who've had a stroke or some sort of something that requires them to have ongoing community support, then you'll find that actually the going home bit and the support they get afterwards is the bit that they'll often talk about most unfavourably. They'll say, oh, people in hospital, they were fabulous, wonderful, I got really good care, and when I went home, I either went home to nothing or I went home to very little support, and I felt like I was abandoned. So that's the bit we've been focusing on in Greater Manchester from 2016 to try and move that forward. Has to be said that because it is a slightly forgotten service, care outside of the hospital, is actually very difficult to transform, and I would argue a more difficult job to do. So that's why I've sort of decided to focus today on it, because people talk about hospital transformations all the time, and actually hospital pathway transformations, and actually I've never really heard very many people talk about what they've been doing about community services. So if you thought you were here for the acute stuff, I'm sorry, I can answer questions afterwards, but I am going to talk about how and why we've done this. So we have in Greater Manchester, because we've transformed our pathway, we have an A-rated service, so there's a national stroke audit and our hospital pathway is A-rated. All 10 CCG areas receive A-rated care, which even London doesn't provide that, so we're very proud of that. That's great. It's not to say that the acute pathway is finished, sorted, it's not. We're continuing to improve it, but the big gap is that when they go home, people do not receive the same level of care, and so all that good work and all that money we've spent in getting the hospital pathway to work is completely wasted because people go home and just deteriorate. So we've saved their lives, but we've effectively we're consigning them to a life of kind of more disability. So I don't know if you understand the centre of the universe that is Greater Manchester. Andy Burnham was on this morning on BBC Breakfast, and so we have a nice conurbation in terms of all our clinical commissioning groups and all of our boroughs, our local authority boroughs, and we have devolution. So our health and social care partnership is all nicely, neatly in one little package, and that's going to be one of my critical success factors for why we can do this. So everybody works as part of a kind of collaborative and a health conurbation that's fairly well established with neat sort of borders. So we have, in fact, we have 11 CCGs, and we have currently we have 17 separate community teams all seeing patients who have stroke, and also sometimes they see patients with other neurological conditions, such as people have had a car accident, or people have had got Parkinson's or something like that. Each of our CCGs has between 1 and 3 teams, and 2 of them didn't have any service at all. And we've got 4 different models of care across those 11 CCGs and 17 teams. So what that's resulted in is basically you go through the hospital pathway, and we've got standardised hospital care, and you've had broadly the same care regardless of where you live, all of it A-rated. And then you go home to postcode lottery, ranging from nothing. If you live in Eastern Cheshire, unfortunately you get nothing at the moment, although I'll come on to that, through to a fully integrated model in North Manchester, where you receive a full package of care regardless of what kind of stroke you've had and for as long as you need. So inequality, and also our teams were differently staffed, and some of them didn't have certain professional groups, so some of them didn't have nurses, some of them don't have psychologists, and often the models being delivered are inefficient. Often, if you've got, I live in Old Trafford, so I live in Trafford, and Trafford has decided to commission not 1, not 2, but 3 community teams, all with slightly different criteria, all overlapping to provide its services, and is spending actually more money than it needs to spend. So some of this isn't about how much money you've got, it's about how you commission your models of care. And there's often wait, so when you've got an inefficient model with perhaps 2 teams, you go into 1 team, and then there's a massive wait to go into the second team if you need further support. And this has often led to longer hospital length of stay. So our areas with good models and no waits are pulled out of hospital nice and quickly, receive care, and that reduces the length of stay in hospital, which is one of the things that commissioners do like to hear and people do like to talk about. So I thought I'd put it on there. But for me, it's about patient experience and it being fair. It shouldn't matter where you live, you should get the same level of care that you need, regardless of your postcode. So it's really fair to say that, and I think this is true for everywhere, not even just community services are not a priority. I go to the Greater Manchester Director of Operations group on a regular basis, mainly to talk about delays in hospital transfers in our acute pathway, and all of them are hospital trust chief operating officers, and all of them have responsibility for community services. Can I get them interested? No, because all they're interested in is bed pressures. But I go and I talk about it because I'm going to wear them down and break them down and make them realise that not only do they look after hospital beds, they look after community teams, and they have a responsibility for that as well. So I go and talk to them about that. So community rehab was really not a priority. Everyone was very interested in the sexy stroke inpatient pathway, and we transformed that, and well done us. And nobody was very interested in the next bit, which actually, if you talk to the Stroke Association, or if you talk to we've got patient care group, everyone says, it was great in hospital when we went home, it was rubbish. So, we wanted to change that. So how did we do that? Well, there's not going to be a test at the end, don't worry. We basically developed a standard model using the evidence base there is. That's the other problem in community services. Loads of evidence base for hospital stroke care, very little for community stroke care. It's all on our website and you're very welcome to share it with the world. But essentially all this really encapsulates is who should be in the team, what your clinical pathways are, and then there's a wraparound to other support such as the voluntary sector. So all we're stipulating is that this is what good should look like. So I'm not going to test you on it, but that's effectively what we've done. We've got a model and we've got a service specification. If you don't know what a service specification is, in the NHS, if you want to run a service, you develop a kind of document saying who should be doing what, why, how, when, that sort of thing. So it's just a way that commissioners use to commission a specific service. So this is what our community service looks like in sort of pictorial form. And so I go to other areas of the country who are busily transforming their inpatient services, and that costs money, and that's where the energy is. And then we talk about community because actually that's the kind of national ambitions to improve rehabilitation. And I keep getting told that there is no money. We can't get people interested, can't get our commissioners to fund this. There is no money. So how did we do that? How have we done this in Greater Manchester? What is the magic? So we've done a number of things actually, so I'll perhaps bring them all up so I can remind myself as to what I'm going to say. So we've done a number of things, and it's table. You notice we started 2.5 years ago in 2016, and we've probably got about another 2 years to run, whereas the acute transformations were done a bit more. There's a lot of talking, but they were done a bit more quickly. In the top left, I'll go through these. So we've won the hearts and minds. So the most powerful argument we had was we've got really good hospital care, people go home, and actually they're going home to really poor services. Actually, from a commissioning perspective, you go and you say we're spending all this money here, and it's all being wasted when people go home. So that's quite a powerful argument. It does rely on you having good hospital services to be able to say that, but actually for us that was one of our key messages, particularly with commissioners. And also it's not fair. Where you live is not fair. With devolution, it's all about Greater Manchester being fair and equal, and that was a really useful thing for us. So devolution came along at the right time. So we talked about the problems, and we also offered a solution. So rather than going saying, oh, it's all rubbish, what are you going to do about it? We said, oh, it's rubbish in parts, and here's best practice, here's what good looks like. We will help you move from there to there. Credible leadership, strong clinical leadership, and that does not mean community service transformation being led by a doctor. Are there any doctors in the room? Fine room. It needs to be therapists and a therapy lead. So we're really lucky. We've got someone really who developed the model. Actually, she's been absolutely critical to that. I go to areas and they're trying to lead transformation with doctors in charge, and it just won't happen because actually the services are led by a therapy led. And you need someone that the teams will respond to, but also commissioners will see as credible because they're actually running their own services. We identified who the key decision makers were, so our Health and Social Care Partnership, our equivalent of our STP, but also in commissioning groups and also in providers. Who are those people? And I think that ties into the one at the bottom, persistence. We just don't stop. We just keep going on and on and keep meeting people. So it is about not giving up on the first attempt. It's about keeping on going. We've used our Health and Social Care Partnership, or our STP, to lever change, and actually they've picked that up in terms of the latter stages. And so the laggards that we've got about 3 or 4 CCGs that haven't made progress, they're now being told they have to do it through devolution. It's on their agenda, it's got to be a commissioning priority. So it's taken a couple of years to get there, but it's now being picked up. CCGs do have money, it's about where you are on their list, so it's about moving up. So we've done that hopefully quite successfully in conjunction now with the STP. And we've broadened it, it's not just stroke. If you make everything too niche, commissioners don't want lots of different pots of money, so actually some of these services create a wider range of patients, not just stroke patients, so we're working with neurorehabilitation. We've also worked with providers to help implement cost-neutral changes, because not every change needs to cost money, and some of this was down to teams not being very efficient. Some of that's commissioning, but actually a lot of that was the ways of working. So in parallel, to show willing with the commissioners, we've worked with the providers to help them be more efficient. I work as a network. I am the capacity in the system, or we are the capacity. We've worked with them to help them lead change locally, and that's been really important. If you don't have capacity in the system to help manage change, then it won't happen. Be persistent, And then we've used evidence where possible to drive the change, although in community that's actually quite difficult because there isn't very much. So just to finish up, what have we achieved? I've always been told it can't be done, and actually it can. So we've got all these different areas. We've got a new service being procured in Eastern Cheshire, so they've spent about £500,000 of new money. We've got new investment in Stockport of about the same, a bit more, and we've got new investment at lots of different areas to bring up what they had before to the gold standard. And then we've got some business cases in development that we'll go through hopefully in the next year. So I think if I was to stand here in a year's time, I'd say we're not sorted, but pretty much probably 10 out of the 11 would have been providing a service that we think is what should be provided. So it can be done, I suppose, is my message in the NHS, but it doesn't happen quickly, and there's different ways of levering that change. I think I'm being told to shut up, so I'll stop, and I'm aware everybody wants lunch. If you are interested, then we've got a website with lots of information. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I don't know if anybody knows anything about stroke, is interested in stroke, but or just in change in general. But does everybody want to go for lunch?
Sometimes.
Oh, there's a microphone.
Sometimes with commissioners to help change the mind, you might want to offer maybe like a 50-50, what they call it, green share.
Sorry, say again.
Like a risk share arrangement. So
yeah.
If you make savings, they get 50% and you get 50%. It's a way to incentivize them as well.
Yeah, and that's quite a lot of what we do as a network is to try and gather some evidence to put into those business cases so that they can say, I mean, you default back to length of, I mean, at the end of the day, what saves money in the NHS? Closing beds. That's reality. So you could talk about different things, but actually that is, so we help to quantify that. But yeah, it's about how that, because sometimes saving money in the hospital system, or doing things in the hospital system, or even in community, it actually benefits social care or something further down, and that's one, whilst we don't have integrated systems, that's the benefit, because the savings or the benefit can be felt by another organisation. So.
Laudable.
Well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.